I don't know him very much, but for what he'd done to the Glorious, I don't reckon very much of him at all.
Why do you say that?
Well, in the first place, we were up in, we were at the Red Sea, and he come across, he got to know that the Graf-Spee was round there, and he wanted to combat her. Now, the Glorious only had 4.7 guns aboard. I don't know what he was. I mean, he was really. He once said that he thought he very near got the VC in the 14-18 war, and he was going to get one in this one.
Did he say that to the crew?
Yeah.
How did he say it to the crew?
He was talking one time, and that's what he said. And then when we were up in Norway, we had no right to be in the position we were in. And because one of his commanders under him, the IUs couldn't get on with him at all. Oh, it was terrible, I believe. I mean, I don't know, but I've read about it since, and the IUs, he left him ashore. And all Hughes wanted to do was get back and put him on a court-martial and disgrace the man. And we should have been in with the convoy, if there was a convoy going back to Scapa Flow. But he wanted to get back on his own. He wanted to get there as soon as he possibly could. And of course, we were in trouble because we had no protection at all. We didn't have any planes up even for spot for us or anything.
The first time we went with the Ark Royal, and the hood, I'm sure the hood was there, and it was quite a decent-sized force, and we were constantly getting air alerts, and on one occasion there was a bomb dropped just alongside the ship, and the splash came right over. Remember that. It didn't splash me, but the fella who had splashed was a gunnery type, you know. And he got a shock. He nearly fainted with a splash.
We did get a near miss with a bomb, because I was down the engine room and I heard a bang, terrific bang, and I thought something had gone wrong with the prop shafts down aft, like, you know. And I went down having a look, and somebody told me it was a 500-pound bomb that had just dropped alongside of us. So I thought, oh, well, that's all right, that's gone. But that's all we had. We did nothing else. One part of our duty was to take these 18 Hurricanes on and fly them off to try to fight for Narvik, you know, because there was no decent planes up in Norway. And then another thing we were doing, our own planes were bombing, I think it was Trondheim and places like that, you know, the harbours. So, and of course, then we were getting bombed a lot from the German planes too. So we had to have our own planes trying to help us out there, because I mean, you couldn't, but our own planes were going up and having battles with the German planes. Say you're going to shoot planes down with what we had, you'd be lucky if you caught one. They had a rough time, them lads.
Then we got the instructions that we were going to Narvik, or North Norway, and our Hurricanes were fitted with variable pitch air screws, and we were given a certain amount of Arctic clothing and other equipment, and our establishment was increased of airmen, and so that we were entirely self-contained with cooks and with everything for the campaign. We were then told that we would be ferried to Norway by the aircraft carrier Glorious, but that it wasn't possible to land on the carrier because tests which had been done at Farnborough indicated that the deck was not long enough for the Hurricanes to come to a stop, as they had no hooks as the Fleet Air Arm aircraft had. So we flew off 18 strong. And the next day we taxied the airplanes through fields to a jetty, put them on a lighter, and went down the Clyde to where the Glorious was anchored. I insisted that each pilot should go with his aeroplane, which was fortunate because the bargees had no idea that the wings wouldn't take a bit of buffeting us on the side of ships and so on. Anyway, we got all 18 aircraft hoisted aboard the Glorious with her cranes. When I was hoisted aboard, I met the commander flying, Commander Heath, who took me to meet the captain, who was a legendary figure in the Navy, Captain D'Oyly Hughes, a man with a great reputation as a submariner from the First World War. He was not particularly welcoming to me. In fact, I was received very formally, and after a few words, left his cabin. The next day we set off for Norway. We went up to Scapa Flow with the other aircraft carrier, the Furious, which contained 263 Squadron, and then set forth for Norway.
And then we picked these Hurricanes up. It wasn't the first time. We had our normal complement of tin fish and things then. But when we went to drop the Hurricanes, it was to put them on the ice floe. They flew off and went on the ice floe. And then, of course, when we got the signal to come back, it was on the 8th of June, and it was very early in the morning, and they all start landing. And we were asking each other, the crew, anybody, asking, have you heard, has any more Hurricanes landed? How many is there now? I think there was 18 went out. And of course the tale went that there was 10 had come back.
It was a great disappointment to us when one day the commander of the RAF force told us that the government had decided to evacuate from North Norway, because at that time we had captured Narvik and we'd pushed the Germans right back from Narvik up to the Swedish border, and in another 2 weeks the whole of North Norway would have been ours. But we understood perfectly well that the amount of shipping required to sustain an expedition at that distance up at Narvik was impossible, with the major commitment now being in France. So we were to evacuate. The CO of the Air Force detachment was Group Captain Maurice Moore, and he came to me and said, we shall want you to cover the evacuation of the troops from the various fields by destroyers, and then, when the evacuation is complete. I declined that course straight away, as I also did the proposal to burn the aeroplanes would be needed at home anyway. And we were determined that we should try and get them home. And I said to Maurice Moore, we hear that the Glorious is back offshore. Couldn't we make an attempt to land on the Glorious? And he said, but the Farnborough figures say it's impossible. I said, but my pilots don't believe that it is impossible. They believe that they could do it. And I believe we could do it. And we will put a sandbag in the last bay of the thing to keep the tail down, which means we can use full brakes, and we believe we can land on the Glorious of this. So he said, well, if you think you can, I'm quite prepared for you to have a try. And I said I would like to go out to the Glorious. This was the night before, to tell them that we're going to try. And he said, I will arrange that. And a walrus amphibian came in that day with an Air Force officer called Carey aboard it. And we went off to the Glorious, and the Commander Heath was no longer there. But Lieutenant Commander Parkin, his number 2, said, that's fine, we'll be all ready for you. The Glorious was in company with the Ark Royal, which was a modern carrier, and had a much longer deck than the Glorious, but they hadn't got the big lifts which the Glorious had, and therefore couldn't lower our aeroplanes into the hangars in the Ark Royal as the Fleet Air Arm aircraft did, because the Fleet Air Arm aircraft, of course, all had folding wings, and we didn't. But I landed on the Ark Royal, and they said, well, if you can't get on the Glorious, have a try here. We've got another 100 feet of deck, and we'll store your aeroplanes on deck if necessary, or we'll chop the wings off and save the fuselages.
And I watched the Hurricanes land on board, and the only one that suffered any damage or Cross landed on first. He was the squadron leader. And the last one that landed a bit far back on the flight deck and just managed to crawl up over the rounded end of the flight deck. It damaged the tail wheel in the process. That was the only one that was damaged. And then they were stowed down in the top hangar, about midships.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I sent my most experienced flight commander, Flight Lieutenant Jameson, with 2 of his pilots, to go out to the Glorious to see if the Hurricane in fact could land on, because I thought if we all went together at 10, it would be a great embarrassment to the Glorious and possibly to the Ark Royal if we were all flying around, running out of petrol and having to land. And I thought it would be a good idea to send 3, so that if they couldn't land, they could signal back to us, and we'd have to reconsider the whole position. Well, they went. A walrus appeared. A swordfish appeared overhead at Bar de Fosse, and Jameson and his 2 went off to the Glorious with instructions to send us a signal saying okay or not okay. And we never got that. We never got any signal at all. And so, at the beginning of the next morning, that I took off with the remainder of the squadron, 7 aircraft, to fly out to the Glorious, 3 o'clock in the morning. So we had been flying, in fact, for 24 hours, solid. And we flew out to the ship, and it was a very welcoming sight when we saw the blinking light on the horizon. and then it was time to try. We didn't know whether Jameson and his two pilots had been successful or not. And I did the first landing, and in point of fact, it turned out to be a relatively simple operation. The Hurricane, my Hurricane, stopped a little over 2/3 up the deck, and I was standing on the brakes pretty hard all the time, and all 7 came on successfully. So in fact, we'd saved the 10 remaining aeroplanes in the squadron. Well, we went down below for some hot cocoa, and then the fact that we had no sleep for 24 hours eventually caught up with us. Up to that time, we were doing an operation which nobody had done before. There was no sleep for 24 hours, but nobody felt the least bit fatigued when they were doing this landing on the Glorious. But once it was over, so we were all exhausted, and we all fell into the bunks which were allocated to us, and nobody woke up really until mid-afternoon the next day, which was June the 8th.
I was servicing the Swordfish. Each fitter was one fitter and one rigger to each aircraft, and obviously the fitter looked after the engine and the rigger looked after the airframe. Well, the aircraft that I was allocated to was eventually put out of action. It had a heavy landing, so of the 6 Swordfish that were on the ship, there was only 5 serviceable because the one was waiting for spares or something. There was something wrong with the airframe with it. It had a heavy landing. And then we were stood off for a time because we'd been up during the night attending to these hurricanes. And I'd just gone down to get a cup of tea, just boarded out, and action stations went. And I went up to the hangar. I never did drink the cup of tea.
I was a seaman, a boy seaman. My action stations was on the fore part of the ship, on the forecastle, and the 4.7 anti-aircraft gun. The way it was, I didn't find any cause for firing any guns. I was on the afternoon watch on the Saturday afternoon, so I was already on duty. Like, the action had taken place around about 3 o'clock, something like that, when we, realised something was happening. Like, we had noticed the German battleships, but we didn't know quite who they were till they opened fire on us. And of course, we got hit once or twice, I think, one on the bridge and a couple of more aft. But where we were on the forecastle, we couldn't see what was happening through the flight deck being in the way. We could only see the forecastle part of the ship, like.
And it was round about 4:45. I'd had some tea, and I'd had a bath, and changed me underclothes and all that. But I'd had some tea. I bought some cheese at the canteen. Now this has got a lot to do with how I survived, because I had something to eat in the mess. And then there was the bang bang. I looked out the porthole, because the cinema room was in the back of the ship, at the stern of the ship, near the stern. And I looked through, and I saw on the quarterdeck, and I saw the Marines loading the guns. And the ship was started to speed up. and she was going pretty fast. And the tannoy, you know, hands to action stations. And I went down the little ladder that we had from the cinema room. I locked the door and I went to action stations, which was about a midships and down hatch. And the action stations I had was in damage control.
I woke up at about 3 and I went along to the wardroom where tea was being served and having a cup of tea when the action stations was sounded on the ship's tannoy. I mentioned that we had been in the ship for 10 days before, and we'd had many practice alarms in that period, and I assumed this was another practice. And I knew that we had no action stations allotted to us, but we had abandoned ship stations allotted to us from our previous passage, and I remembered that it meant a lot of standing about in these practices. And I went along to my cabin and put on my Irvine jacket, my padded Irvine jacket, and for some unknown reason, I put the squadron funds amounting to £200 or £300 in an envelope in my inner pocket. I don't know why I did that, but I did. And then I went up to my action station, which was on the quarter deck, right at the extreme stern of the ship. And when I got there, I saw on the horizon 2 patches of smoke. And as I looked at them, I saw flashes. And within a few seconds, 3 plumes of water arrived in the just about 10 yards off where we were standing. It was, considering that the Germans were virtually out of sight, all you could see was the smoke. It was a remarkable first salvo.
The damage control position was under the officers' mess in the wardroom flat, and it was next to a magazine, and it was just the manhole, and I went down the manhole, and the officer in charge said to me, "You better take the phone," and I took it. So I was listening to all the different things from the different telephone people.
What do you remember hearing?
I remember hearing they're going to take some torpedoes on the flight deck. Now, we had, I think it was 5 swordfish on board, only 5. And they were going to take them up, and I says, thank God for that. You know, I wish I was up there to help to load them on, you know, because that was my... And then, of course, the voice said, "Oh, I don't think they're going to do it now. I think they've scrubbed it, and they're taking them back again." He said they were taking the tin fish up as well, you know, aren't they? But he said, "Oh, they've scrubbed it, they're taking them back." And I couldn't understand that. But anyway, that was the end of that.
And of course it was the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. And I'm not sure what it was one of the upper class with them, 3 of them, that got the Glorious. And they were about 10 miles away from us. And, well, the first salvo ripped the flight deck up and all this. And they just put shell after shell into us until she was no more. She was on fire all over the place.
I then thought that perhaps I ought to report to the bridge as the CO of the squadron and see whether there were any instructions for me. And so I went up the starboard gangway on the starboard side of the ship onto the flight deck. And as I stepped onto the deck, a second salvo hit the ship, demolishing the gangway I'd just come up, and the third shell of the salvo hit the deck about 10 yards in front of me, making a large hole, but it didn't explode. The full seriousness of the situation was then apparent to me, and I went forward to the bridge, and this was confirmed by the tenseness of the faces of the people on the bridge there, and it was plain to me that I would be in the way. So I went back across the flight deck to the gangway on the port side, on the other side, and down, and went back to my abandoned ship station on the quarterdeck. The ship was then hit by a number of salvos, and the intercommunication system failed, so that the only information we had from the bridge on the quarterdeck was by a runner or messenger. And for the next half an hour, 40 minutes, the ship was steadily hit by salvos. One of the first salvos after I had left the flight deck hit the island where the bridge was, and we understood killed the captain, because we were told that the ship was now under the command of the commander.
What could you hear when you were in the dynamo room?
Huge bang of the ship getting hit. You know, when it echoes everywhere, doesn't it? Shell fire. The Scharnhorst is a good... You see, they could afford to get close to us without reply, because our guns were only 4.7s, and that was there. It's like a bloody water pistol in comparison to their guns. So we were hit repeatedly, and there was already a list, you know, on the ship. And I was told that the first salvo went through the flight deck. So whatever aircraft we had couldn't take off anyway. That was, you know, sometimes you get told things that, whether they're true, you have to take somebody's word for it. But I believe there wasn't many aircraft on the job. They'd already lost those.
Well, I was in the engine room, and all I knew was that we were in action, like, you know, we could hear them going off. And then one of the boiler rooms got hit, so they had to close the boiler room down. And then I went fire and repair party, because, well, of course, you never think the ship's going to get sunk, you know. And you were going around putting fires out all over the place and seeing what you could do. But it was just a waste of time, because there wasn't a part of the ship that they weren't firing at. And she was ablaze from stem to stern. And you were just going around to see what you could do, that's all.
How frightening was it?
Well, I don't think really I suppose you are frightened in one sense, but I don't think you really are. It doesn't get you that you're frightened, you know, because you've got so much to do that you can't be thinking about being frightened, you know. I only remember one time, and the Killick stoker said to me, I've come up here without my gas mask and things like that. Will you go back out and get them for me? You know, we were going all over the place putting fires out, as I said. And I was going along a companionway, and I thought, my God, I might never get back to him, the way these shells are coming in, like, you know. And of course, I went on the stoker's mess deck for his gear, and it was just like a butcher shop. There was bodies all over the place. The doctors were there, like, you know, trying to help people. I was glad to get back again, down around the engine room and places like that to see what we could do. But, and then, of course, the abandoned ship, and then they belayed that pipe, and we abandoned ship later on, like, you know. It was just, you couldn't do nothing. I mean, no matter what you do, she was burning from stem to stern. All the planes were on fire. They were in the hangars. You know, everything was just chaotic.
And then there was crashes all over the place. And another voice said, "Oh, the hangar's on fire. The hangar's on fire." And they're trying to get the screens down. The smoke, you know, the hangar screens to stop the air from coming in to make it worse. And things like that went on. Yes, he says they've got the screens down, and all that, you know, and little things like that, which the gist of it was that. And I was worrying about the tin fish in the fire, all the tin fish, because we had them in the hangar on both sides, you know.
Went up to the hangar, and I was sent down to an aircraft right down the aft end of the upper hangar, because it had been under inspection and all the engine cowlings were off, and we'd put the cowlings back on it, and also it had a light series bomb racks on, and they needed torpedo racks on to attack the enemy ships. And the armourers were busy doing that, changing the racks over so they could put torpedoes on it. But before that was finished, a shell came through the flight deck, midships up the hangar, and set all the Hurricanes on fire. And so we put the fire screens down and turned on the sprinklers. And what was very frightening, because you didn't know when there was the shells coming in, you didn't know when one was going to come in and see you off. And you didn't know where they were coming in, you couldn't see anything. And then there was an awful lot of injured people about that had been hit. We couldn't do any more with the aircraft, which I was concerned with, because the hangar was all on fire then. But then there was a leading airfitter, Smith. He said, "We better go out here onto the boat deck." And I saw the destroyers putting a smoke screen around the ship.
I was in the dynamo room, and you're already battened down in there, like all departments are. And I don't know to this day who opened that. Well, the order had come to abandon the ship,
But I don't know whether that door was supposed to be open. But somebody opened the door, and it's got to be open from the outside. So I don't know too much about that, but I know we got let out. And I come up on the rear, hatch, on the quarter deck, right astern. And from there I could weigh the scene up. I could see the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau quite clearly. In the distance, but quite clearly.
What did they look
And just
like?
flashing. Oh, you could see full length. And just the flashing, that would be the guns. And there was an action going on with one of the destroyers. It engaged one of the ships. And I was told later on and through time that she got a torpedo hit on, I think it was the Scharnhorst. But in doing so, she was sunk herself.